Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Politics Unplugged after the State of the Union. I'm Ann Trujillo, and we are here to discuss the topics covered by the president tonight: immigration, prison reform, the state of the economy, even unity. And joining me tonight, former Republican State Representative Cole West and current Democratic State Senator Julie Gonzalez. So thank you both for being here. We sat here together tonight watching the president's speech, followed by Stacey Abrams. What did you think about the president's speech, first and foremost? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it was a very long speech. He exceeded the length of last year's speech, and I think we heard coming into tonight that it would be less than an hour. And clearly, he went well beyond that. I think he covered a number of topics, but I think we saw a president return to his populist themes that we saw during the 2016 campaign, and I think an appeal to his base, clear appeal to his base on a number of those issues that played well in the 2016 election.
Julie, what do you think?
You know, it was hard to hear the president call for unity and really give a bunch of overtones to unity, you know, just 10 days before we potentially could be looking at another government shutdown, and just after, you know, hundreds of thousands of American workers having to go through 35 days of a government shutdown. And so, you know, that was a really hard place for him to start. And I really think that we're operating, and it was clear through the speech itself, there's a new game in town with so many Democrats really taking office and controlling the House.
Because he started with a message of rejecting politics with revenge. These are his words: embracing compromise and common good. Did you ultimately hear that from the president tonight?
Well, I think interestingly, back in 2017, Donald Trump said it's so easy to act presidential, but that's not going to get it done. And what I saw tonight is continued efforts by the president to look presidential, to sound presidential, but yet he came back to, you know, some of those themes about vision, not vengeance, results, not resistance, and greatness over gridlock. So I think he comes close to those high moments when he looks and sounds presidential, and yet we see the Donald Trump that I think has been very successful politically because of his unconventional nature.
And part of what I heard in that was a real difference between his rhetoric and what he actually then does when he's not offering these big lofty speeches. I mean, he was talking today in the speech around you know, really honoring the sacrifice of our veterans, honoring the efforts of our military, and yet this is a president who also went and tried to withdraw thousands of troops from the Middle East via tweet. And so the words don't match his actions.
Okay, so one of the biggest, his biggest issue tonight, I think, was immigration. I think we can all agree on that. You are an immigration attorney, Julie. He devoted most of his time to this subject. Let's listen in for a moment.
This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America. We have a moral duty to create an immigration system that protects the lives and jobs of our citizens. Meanwhile, working-class Americans are left to pay the price for mass illegal immigration. Reduced jobs, lower wages, overburdened schools, hospitals that are so crowded you can't get in, increased crime, and a depleted social safety net. Tolerance for illegal immigration is not compassionate. It is actually very cruel.
That was speaking to his base, as you were talking about, Cole. What'd you think?
You know, this is what was really difficult about the dissonance from the Trump administration and his rhetoric tonight. You know, this is a president who is calling for unity and talking about compassion, and yet when it comes down to the children who were put in cages and then separated from their parents, this administration is now telling parents that it's going to be too hard for those babies to be reunited with their parents. And so I have a hard time believing this president when he says we actually need to act compassionately by going and building a wall. If we actually want to address our border issues, let's have a real meaningful dialogue about that. But building a medieval wall is nowhere near a solution.
I think one good thing that the president did tonight was to remind the country that the issue of border security and barriers at the border is not a new issue. We have more than 650 miles of physical barriers on our southern border, and the last 3 presidents approved of these barriers, including more than 130 miles under former President Obama. So this is not a new issue. The president's reminding the country to stay the course in terms of making our borders more secure. But it's worth reminding folks that the $5.7 billion we're talking about for a border wall is certainly not for the entire stretch. We're talking about 270 miles of the southern border for additional barriers for that which have been approved by the prior 3 presidents.
Well, in fact, he specifically spoke about that. So let's listen to that right now.
People in this room voted for a wall, but the proper wall never got built. I will get it built. Where walls go up, illegal crossings go way, way down.
Here's the issue. Even after this government shutdown, where Donald Trump promised the American people that we were going to build a wall and Mexico was going to pay for it, and then we actually shut down our government for 35 days because he couldn't get Congress to pay for it, a majority of Americans, 58%, continue to oppose expanding the border wall. And the other thing that I think is really important to lift up is the fact that the president did acknowledge the opioid crisis that is running rampant and causing 3 deaths a day here in Colorado. And yet, when we put the money to a wall, that means that drugs will continue to flow through the ports of entry. And we're not doing, and President Trump is doing nothing to address that aspect of border wall and border security.
I mean, let's not forget that the whole border security conversation is more than just about a wall. This is about broader security measures and let's face it, one of the first and most important missions and objectives of the federal government is to secure our borders. And I think the president's laid out a compelling reason as to why we need a comprehensive approach. And yes, physical barriers are a piece of that, like they've been in the prior 3 administrations.
And I know this is a great subject that everybody loves to debate, but let's get to some of the other topics that he discussed tonight. I think that what was fascinating talking about funding when he was talking about HIV research, and he was talking briefly mentioned opioid crisis and so forth. Did that seem like it was out of left field? I think we all kind of looked at each other like, where did that come from?
I think there were some interesting transitions in the speech. At times he was talking about health care, then he was talking about foreign policy. We came back to HIV and childhood cancer. And obviously these are issues where you're going to get broad support across the country. I think the $500 million of new research for childhood cancer is something I'm sure that you're going to see broad bipartisan support for. But I think the president's focus on health care as a transparency issue, as a fairness issue, as a consumer-oriented issue is something that I hope will get bipartisan support for.
Here's the concern, though. We have an administration and a party, in a Republican Party, who has failed to actually move meaningful healthcare reform, right? The Republicans time and time again have attacked the Affordable Care Act and have no plan to actually say, well, this is what we're going to do to fix things, right? And so talking about going and ending AIDS and ending the AIDS crisis, you know how you can do that? Support reproductive health care for women and stop attacking the choices that women make with their own bodies.
Well, he did talk about abortion specifically tonight when he proposed prohibiting late-term abortion, which Colorado is one of a handful of states that still allows that. That was not a surprise that he would go to the abortion issue tonight, no?
I think it's a hot button issue. We've seen a lot in the press recently with the press coverage in Virginia and New York, but I think you're going to hear more from Republican lawmakers about this issue. And I think that the president's statement that all children born and unborn need to be protected certainly is going to trigger that longstanding debate about when life begins and at what point should there be legal protection for a child in the womb. But I think this issue is not going away, and I think we're going to see this issue going into the 2020 campaign.
And I really think that for a president to say, you know, we are a culture that cherishes innocent life, when this president and his administration is also the same administration who put babies in cages, again, it's a place where the rhetoric doesn't meet the policy. I really think that we need to be thoughtful about you know, the fact that every woman's situation is different and every pregnancy is different. And we should really be allowing those healthcare decisions to be made by a woman and her doctor, not by a politician.
One of the things that he said tonight, America will never be a socialist country. Was that a slam? Was that directed at somebody?
Well,
how'd you interpret that?
I think Senator Sanders, the camera cut away immediately to him, but it received pretty broad applause in the chamber. And if you think back to the last 20, 30 years, had President Reagan or even President Clinton or President Obama said that we are not going to be a socialist country, I think everybody would have said, of course, America is not going to be a socialist country. I think we're looking at these failed policies in countries like Venezuela to see the massive backlash from that country in terms of socialist policies. If we're going to have the debate about whether socialism works, folks on the Republican side welcome that, because we think free markets, liberty, and freedom are the way to attack problems, not socialism.
And here's the reason why Donald Trump is attacking these policies, right? Policies that ask the ultra-rich and the uber-rich to pay their fair share. Fox News just had a poll that demonstrated that 70% of voters support policies to ensure that the uber-rich pay their fair share and pay more to help ensure that we can support working families in this country. So even Donald Trump's conservative base is on board with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's and Elizabeth Warren's tax policies. It's wildly popular.
I'm not sure I've heard one Republican say that a 90% tax rate is something that America should do. So are there ways for us to have new conversations about the proper role of government and how we fund it? Absolutely. 90% taxes? No.
90% taxes after your $10th million, that's something that is wildly popular with the American people.
Well, I think how we define uber rich, may be subject to discussion. But at the end of the day, most folks believe that they know how to spend their money better than the government. So,
how do you think? I didn't know what to expect from the crowd, because we kept hearing that there were going to be other people brought in. His speech was actually warmly received, was it not? I mean, there seemed to be plenty of moments of applause and people standing up.
I think the only time that that you saw real bipartisan support was when everyone gathered around to sing "Happy Birthday" to the Holocaust survivor who survived this shooting at the synagogue. Right? That was a beautiful moment, right? And there were other moments when when the president celebrated the number of women who had just taken their place in Congress, and the women were high-fiving each other and celebrating their own moment, and not giving any time to the president.
And we have that clip as well. So let's watch that moment tonight.
All Americans can be proud that we have more women in the workforce than ever before.
Many of the women were wearing white because of the suffragette movement, and so that was, I thought, a nice moment in there when he really spoke to what we are seeing happening all across the country, right?
It was certainly I mean, if Trump wants a wall, that was a wall of women who are going to do the hard work to hold him accountable.
And I think we've seen here in Colorado that women now comprise a majority of the State House of Representatives. Right. These are great things for our country. We're bringing new perspectives to issues, and the way we solve problems in this country is listening to each other and listening to new perspectives. So I think all of the new lawmakers, particularly all the new women lawmakers, I think bring a fresh, welcome perspective to our country's dialogue.
I'm one of those women. Seeing Donald Trump's policies actually spurred me to say, you know what,
you are newly elected.
I'm
to
just
the State House, yes.
serving my first month in the state Senate, and you know, when I saw Donald Trump's policies actually being put into action here in Colorado, I decided to say, you know what, I'm tired of saying this is what I'm against. I'm interested in building a politics of what are we going to stand for and what are we actually going to build. And so I think that to that point, I think there were some moments where you know, the president did propose policies that I think both of us kind of looked at each other and were like, oh, and that was namely criminal justice reform, right? And attacking those old stale politics that had said, well, if you mess up once, let's just lock you up and throw away the key. And the fact that he had people who had been sentenced to long sentences and had the opportunity
released, yes.
To start anew, that I think was a really meaningful moment, and one that goes across the partisan.
You both said this is one that we can agree on.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we talked last year in the legislature about the fact that we spend almost $1 billion in Colorado on corrections, and let's keep in mind we call it the Department of Corrections for a reason, because 95% of these people are going to return to the general population. And I applaud the president for leading a bipartisan discussion on an issue that I think is often left in the shadows. We have people in the criminal justice system, they're incarcerated, and we tend to forget about the cost that has to our society. So I think that was a great bipartisan moment tonight.
Stacey Abrams, was she the right choice for the rebuttal tonight?
I think that Stacey Abrams is the future of the Democratic Party. She is someone who did the work, came up by standing up alongside others who haven't always had a seat at the table. And so I loved hearing her story. I loved hearing her vision. And I love the fact that she talked about the work that needs to continue, particularly around ensuring access to the vote. Because how can we have a democracy if not everyone has the ability to cast their ballot in a free and fair election?
One of her big issues was gun issues, and the fact that the president did not raise any topic related to gun issues tonight. I know that's a tough issue. That has been a tough issue for you. Yeah. You supported the red flag bill.
You know, the president did talk about the synagogue shooting. I think that was the closest we got tonight to a discussion about gun policy. I didn't expect frankly, the president to have a conversation about that. But, you know, I think for the most part, gun control issues tend to be state-driven policy issues, and we're going to see that here in Colorado as well as across the country.
What else? What was missing from his speech? Was there anything missing that you just said that was glaring? It was just not at all on the mark, or not there?
I'll give you my first take, and that is his discussion of foreign policy was unlike any recent Republican president that I have heard. Ronald Reagan certainly talked about a city shining on a hill and America's role on the world stage, and the president talked about talks over true pressure. And his big line was, great nations do not fight endless wars. So this president seems to be talking about diplomacy over use of military force as a way to bring change in the world. This is a pretty significant difference from I think, you know, both President Bush's and as well as President Reagan in terms of their role of America on the world stage. So that was a big takeaway for me.
And we do have, let's listen to that soundbite for a moment, then we will continue, Julie. Go ahead.
Great nations do not fight endless wars. It is time to give our brave warriors in Syria a warm welcome home. I have also accelerated our negotiations to reach, if possible, a political settlement in Afghanistan.
Julie, I know you wanted to
So
jump in.
you had asked the question as to what were the issues that were missing from his State of the Union, and honestly, any type of I didn't hear any type of solution to address our climate change crisis. And the president did speak in sort of banal and general terms around energy infrastructure, but we need to ensure that we are doing everything that we can to address this impending crisis. It will be the biggest issue that faces my generation.
I know that is a huge issue. Also, tariffs on China. You were scoffing at that.
Well, I think we've seen a pretty significant and robust discussion in the Republican Party about tariffs, their effectiveness. I'm a free trade guy. I think, and Donald Trump for decades has been talking about America being ripped off, by China and other countries. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays in the Midwest. Again, I think, this was an appeal back to the president's populist base. The Rust Belt was certainly a key to his election in 2016. The tariff issue is a direct appeal to those folks.
And I know the president made some news tonight when he announced during his speech that he will be meeting with the North Korean leader and set a specific date in Vietnam. Let's listen to that.
If I had not been elected President of the United States, we would right now, in my opinion, be in a major war with North Korea.
Tepid applause there, and you can't help but look at Nancy Pelosi's face and see that there was a little, I don't know, awkward moment there.
It really reminded me back to when Donald Trump was running for office, and he gave the Republican convention speech, and he said, "I alone can fix this," and that sort of. It just wasn't the right tone. It's not the actual way that America works at its best. We work at our best when we are investing in our own infrastructure, when we are creating good jobs that with which you can actually afford to pay your rent, afford to feed your family, and afford to pay your prescriptions to keep your family healthy. And so that's the work that we should be focusing on.
He did talk about job creation. He did talk about a record number, and I think we read a fact check on it. It wasn't quite as he claimed, but pretty close. So I mean, he does have that to celebrate.
I just don't think that talking about, oh, if it wasn't for me, North Korea, we'd be in war. That's not the right way to go about it. And he's been, quite frankly, more engaged in Twitter battles than he actually has been in achieving real policies and real negotiations and real results.
I think there are interesting times when we watch this president speak, because one of the reasons why he was successful in 2016 is his ability to talk in an unfiltered way to the American electorate. And there were times tonight when you certainly saw the presidential aspect of Donald Trump, wanting to look presidential, sound presidential. That, to me, was one of those moments where it seemed more like the rally version of Donald Trump, not the State of the Union message. So, and I think that is a part of his success. It's a part of the reason why I think he gets attacked for people that don't think that's presidential enough. But you could see from that clip, certainly I think some folks recognized some unease about that.
Do you think he felt pressure tonight, knowing that this was an opportunity for him to sort of restart things, right? Because given the shutdown, that did not reflect well on the Trump administration. Do you think he felt that pressure tonight coming in? And I don't know, did you hear the messaging that you wanted to hear tonight as a Republican?
I thought he would be more feisty. I really thought that he was measured. I thought his comments were certainly less aggressive than we've seen him in other sessions. So I give him good marks for the tone of the speech. I also give him good marks for the broad message. Certainly it was very long. He covered a number of issues. I think that the takeaway here is going to be the impact on the immigration debate and to see where that takes us on February 15th.
Definitely.
Donald Trump has a 60% unfavorable rating here in the state of Colorado. And this past November, the election results were resoundingly clear, where Coloradans, even unaffiliated voters, rejected his policies. And so I think tonight was his attempt to try to gloss over his policies with a veneer of let's all get together and talk about unity. But then he went over the same failed policies, particularly around immigration, which just Coloradans reject. And so we have 10 days before the next government deadline shutdown looms. And so he really has to get back to work and start negotiating, because words are nice, policy's better.
So you felt like it was more of the same from him when it came to the issue of the wall?
When it came to the issue around immigration, and when he was fear-mongering with families of victims who, had been impacted by undocumented people, those are tactics that are meant to sow fear and stoke division, as opposed to talking about the things that unite us and what our commonalities around the solution should be. That's a place where, if he wanted to actually talk about unity, he could have framed his talking points around immigration. The fact that he failed to do that, to me, shows that he's, all the pretty words at the beginning of his speech were negated by his actually policy push on immigration and the wall.
Cole, did you see him try to offer an olive branch there on the topic of immigration? Or
I think there's always been an invitation to negotiate, but I think what's going to be interesting to see is whether or not Democrats want to continue to drive the wedge between Trump and his base, because I think they recognized that the shutdown hurt the president with his base, and politically that may be in their interest. So we have three parties here. We have the Democrats in the House, we have the Republicans in the Senate, and we have the White House. And this is almost a three-way standoff. The issue will be, will one of those parties walk away from the table, or are we going to look at a solution where everyone is not going to get exactly what they want, but we're going to come away with a better outcome in terms of talking in a responsible, mature way about border security.
Yeah, because we are 10 days away from another possible government shutdown. Can Congress, can the president, can they get together on this? Let's hear what the president said about that.
Together we can break decades of political stalemate. We can bridge old divisions, heal old wounds, build new coalitions, forge new solutions, and unlock the extraordinary promise of America's future. The decision is ours to make. We must choose between greatness or gridlock, results or resistance, vision or vengeance, incredible progress or pointless destruction. Tonight, I ask you to choose greatness.
Which sounded great, but you two don't.
Here's the thing. We just ended this government shutdown where the president pursued those politics of vengeance, where he pursued the politics of revenge, and it failed, and his poll numbers reflect that failure. And so for him to now say, well, let's come back to the table and let's pursue greatness, we have 10 days to see if he's actually willing to put his money where his mouth is.
Well, let's not forget that that's a two-way conversation. So and I think we can spend the next 2 weeks talking about who was to blame for the last shutdown, or we can start to have a conversation about what's a solution that works for most folks in the country. And I'd rather not have the president focus on what happened in the past and talk about what's coming in the future. And I think that's what he tried to do, with this section of the speech. But I think it's going to be a challenge to see whether politics wins out or reason wins out.
Okay, so if you were betting people, February 16th, what happens? What are we seeing on February 16th?
You know what? I'd really love for everyone to get to agreement that we shouldn't be holding the American people and our federal workers hostage in order to continue playing politics. And so I would love to see that happen before February 16th, because we know that too many people were at risk of losing their homes, of losing their not being able to put food on the table for their families, while Washington politicians were playing their games. And so that's what I hope we're able to see. I hope that we're not on the 16th doing this all over again.
I don't think there's going to be another shutdown. I think it was pretty telling tonight that the president did not talk about using emergency powers to build more sections of the border wall. So that was telling to me that he didn't talk about that.
He didn't go there, yes.
And I expected that he would tee that up as almost a threat, that he would do that if Congress didn't make it, didn't reach some resolution. So, I think that suggests to me that he's going to push for the diplomatic route. He's going to push for negotiation, and I sure hope it's successful.
Now, the president did mention the ongoing investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller, saying his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election has gone on for too long. Here's more of what he said.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation.
All right, Julie, I'm watching you shake your head.
Part of me, the cynic in me, really wonders if the reason why Trump is interested in criminal justice reform is because so many of his close allies from the campaign are getting indicted. The fact that he is calling this investigation partisan, I think, just leaves us in a cloud of uncertainty. This is the Mueller investigation needs to be allowed to come to completion, and then the results of that investigation need to be made public so that the American people can actually make decisions as to the actions of their president.
Yeah, in 1962, President Kennedy said in his State of the Union, he was talking to Congress, the Constitution makes us not rivals for power, but partners for progress. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and we've seen in Democratic administrations that Republican Congresses have had oversight and investigations. And I don't fault Congress for utilizing its oversight powers. That's a part of co-equal branches of government. It's certainly the way that this works. So I think the right tone is to talk about, and I agree with Julie, completing this investigation, having transparency, let's shine a light. I think the Mueller report should be coming out soon, and then hopefully we can start to make a step towards either resolution of these issues or further investigation. But I think using that as a talking point in order to score policy objectives may be misguided.
Yeah. Was that even fair for him to bring that up tonight when this should have been a message of conciliation?
I mean, I think he's going to use that point that let's not get distracted by partisanship. But partisanship to me is different than what partisanship would be to Julie. So this is I think a matter of Congress fulfilling the objective that it has. And let's face it, the House of Representatives changed hands in November, and elections have consequences, and we're about to see what those consequences are.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we asked a question on Facebook today, and we asked people, the State of the Union is blank, and then we asked people to fill in the blank, and we heard from hundreds of you, so we just want to go through a few of those. Sue says the State of the Union is rocking. And she says, thanks, Trump. And Brent says the State of the Union is pretty normal as far as it goes. The economy is better. While Melissa Taylor chose to answer with this instead of a word. Clearly a dumpster on fire. All right, so let's bring that back to our panel here. Now that you saw the speech, how would you describe the State of the Union address tonight?
You know, for me, I really think that Colorado is doing the work here locally to be able to just put up a firewall against the shenanigans of the Trump administration. And so we're doing the work here at our state capitol to protect our Colorado way of life, to make sure that workers are paid what they're worth, to make sure that we're protecting our environment, and to make sure that everyone in our state is treated with dignity and respect. And so, you know, I heard lots of things that I disagreed with in tonight's State of the Union. To be honest, I heard some things that I was like, all right, I can applaud that.
Wait, like what? Like what?
Like the criminal justice reform efforts, like the acknowledgement that there are so many women in Congress, like honoring our military veterans.
Sure.
Absolutely. Those kinds of things, I think, were overtures. But at the end of the day, there were so many places where he just couldn't help himself but make some of these flip comments around, you know, the partisan investigations being ridiculous, or just a bunch of other sort of comments that just really underscored that he can't help himself sometimes, you know. And so I do think, though, that because it gave me great joy to see Speaker Pelosi sitting behind him, actually just you know, continuing to review her papers, and you know, she'll be there along with so many other Democrats in Congress to hold the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself accountable.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the State of the Union is it's a reminder of the fact that what unites us as a country far outweighs what divides us. And sometimes in this you know, 24/7 news cycle, we tend to we get in our echo chambers and we talk about all the things that we disagree about. But as Julie mentioned, all of those things that unite us as a country, honoring our veterans, promoting our economy, and making sure that everyone has an opportunity for a fair wage and an opportunity to improve their lives. Those are the kinds of things that unite us. And you know, my hope is that we'll hear more about those kinds of things. But let's face it, this is politics. And you know, what drives the business of politics is making distinctions and drawing differences. But I think there was a lot of good things in this speech that hopefully we can move forward with.
Well, I think there were a lot of takeaways that I think people will be chewing on for weeks and months to come. But a memorable State of the Union address tonight for sure. And I want to thank you both for being here and offering your insight. It was so helpful to have you both here, Cole Wist, Julie Gonzalez. You too, thank you so much. Thanks, and we will be back on Denver 7 at 10 o'clock with more coverage of the State of the Union. But for now, we thank you for joining us.